a cowboy came to collect her debts, yet fell for the woman he shouldn't love. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you listening from tonight? And when the story is over, don't forget to give it a rating from 0 to 10 now. Settle back and enjoy the story. Montana, spring of 1881. The wind howled across the plains, sweeping up clouds of red dust, carrying with it the chill of melting ice and the damp resin of pine. Far on the horizon, a fire-red sunset was swallowing the last ridges of the mountains. A lone cowboy rode into Alder Bend. Each hoofbeat echoed sharp against the old wooden street, the clink of his spurs breaking the silence. He stopped in front of an abandoned workshop, his hand brushing the grip of his revolver by instinct, then slowly let it fall away. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled letter. Inside, a woman lifted her head. 6 years had passed, yet now they stood face to face once more. But instead of demanding the debt she owed, his words came like a shot through still air. Marry me. Instead of paying the debt, the silence that followed was like a knife through the room, leaving even the hardest heart caught between disbelief and sorrow. Montana, spring of 1881. The town of Alder Bend lay sunken in the vast prairie, a scar across a land the world had almost forgotten. Its main street lay quiet under the fading light. The saloon spilled a weak, golden glow through its crooked windows. A broken banjo strumming somewhere inside, mingling with the laughter of men who had drunk too much to remember their troubles. Farther off, the rusted tracks of the railway stretched useless across the weeds, like time itself had abandoned this place. A man rode in. His boots, layered in trail dust, struck hard against the saloon porch. The brim of his hat shaded half his face, but the eyes beneath cold gray blue carried the weight of everything they had seen. His name was Yates Kincaid, 35 years old. Once he had left this very place, chasing justice at the end of a gun. He returned with calloused hands, a haunted silence, and regrets that followed him like shadows. No longer a reckless young man, not yet an old one. He was simply a man who knew the truth. You can't outrun memory forever. The mountain wind rolled down the street, tossing old newspapers along the boards. Yates paid them no mind. His heart was heavy with the words of a letter tucked in his saddlebag. A plea written in a trembling hand by the woman he once loved, the woman he had left behind. Please, for the children. When he stopped before the weathered workshop, he tightened the reins. A dim lamplight flickered through the cracks of the door. Inside, she still worked late into the night, bent over the same burdens life had chained to her. What was about to happen was more than a man collecting a debt. It was the reckoning of two lives, once bound, then broken, a past too heavy to forget, a chance, maybe, for redemption. And so the question hangs in the still air. If you were the cowboy riding into this town, what would be the very first thing you'd do? Part 1. The Mad Proposal. The wooden door creaked shut behind Yates, cutting off the wail of the prairie wind. Inside the small room, the faint light of a kerosene lamp quivered across smoke-darkened walls, its glow casting restless shadows that danced and died in silence. The air was heavy with the scents of old flour, ashes, and half-burned pine wood, as though time itself had stopped here years ago. Calla Prescott lifted her head at the sound of boots across the floor. Steam still rose from the chipped enamel basin at her side, her hands raw and red from scrubbing too long in soap and lye. Her breath caught when she saw him. 6 years, 6 long years since the man who had walked out of her life now stood framed in her doorway, road dust clinging to his broad-brimmed hat. Yates! Her voice cracked, as though pulled from deep within her chest. He only gave a slow nod. His eyes met hers steady, unflinching, but not warm enough to melt the ice that had hardened inside her. He set his riding gloves on the scarred table, his fingers brushing over a split in the wood, as if it carried the years between them. "I read your letter." Calla tightened her grip on the towel in her hands, gaze drifting away. From the yard outside came the sound of children's laughter, bright, clear, almost too pure for the suffocating stillness of the room. Olivia and Owen, her last hope, the reason she had written that desperate letter, swallowing her pride, to beg. The fire popped in the stove. Silence thickened, pressing in, until Yates finally stepped closer, his shadow stretching long across the floorboards. His voice was low, sanded down by years of wind and war. "You owe me near $300. Calla flinched. She had prepared herself for those words, heard them in nightmares. Countless nights. Still, the weight of them bound her chest tight, as if rope had been drawn across her heart. Yates' gaze stayed locked on hers, his voice dropping lower, but instead of paying, he paused, drawing in a breath that lifted his broad shoulders in the lamplight. "And marry me." The room split wide with silence, sharp as a blade. Even the flames seemed to freeze in the grate. Calla stood rooted, certain she had misheard. She stumbled back a step, the towel slipping from her hands, falling to the floor with a soft thud, like a muffled sob. "What did you just say?" Yates's expression never shifted. "Marry me in place of the debt." The words struck like stones in still water, sending ripples through every memory she had buried. Marry him, the man who had left when she needed him most, the man who once walked away beneath the cottonwood tree, swallowed by a marching column, never to return. You've lost your mind. Her laugh broke brittle, her eyes glistening red. That's the cruelest jest I've ever heard. Yates's jaw tightened, veins rising beneath sunburned skin. He didn't look away. I'm no man for jests. You have 2 children who need a protector. You need a roof strong enough to hold against the winter. I've got land. I've got work in these hands. That's all I have left to give. Calla bit down hard on her lip until it bled. Memories surged, long nights spent weeping when her husband never came home. The day she heard Yates had taken another woman's hand far from here, it all pressed down, and she wanted to scream. Then came the sound of small footsteps outside the door. Olivia's playful call, Owen's quick laughter, innocent, unknowing. Calla's heart twisted. She knew her strength was fraying. If no one stepped in, sooner or later, her children would be left with no one. Yates's eyes softened at the sound, then settled back on her. I didn't come to shame you. I came to give us both a way out. Her whisper cracked. A way out. Or another prison. The air thickened until one could almost hear the beating of their hearts. The lamplight caught the worn map of Yates's face lines cut deep by years, a scar, faint along his jaw, each mark carved by dust. Va and regret. You say marry you instead of paying a debt. Is that justice? Calla asked, her voice raw. No. Yates's reply was slow, heavy. It's the last chance I have at calling something family. Calla let out a strangled laugh, her eyes wet. Family. You could have had that. With me. But you chose to leave. Yates bowed his head slightly, his eyes bright as thawing ice. And I've paid for it. Every day, these 6 years, I was lost, Kalia, but when I read your letter, he pulled the crumpled page from his pocket, edges frayed and worn. I knew if I turned away now, I'd never again be able to call myself a man. Her breath faltered at the sight of her own words. Please, for the children. It cut through her, the truth sharp as steel. His proposal was more than erasing debt. It was a confession, an attempt at redemption, a desperate bid for home. But could she trust him again? Calla sat heavily on the edge of the table, her face buried in her hands. Her thin shoulders trembled. Yates stood frozen, afraid that even a step closer might shatter her completely. You left me waiting, she whispered. That night, I stood beneath the cottonwood until the frost soaked my hair. You swore you'd return, but you never did. Yates's voice came low, ground down with sorrow. I was wrong. I thought leaving would prove I was worth something. Instead, I lost everything. A train whistle moaned far off, carrying the sound of a world moving on without them, echoing like a ghost of all they'd missed. Kala lifted her tear-filled eyes, sharp with pain. And now you return, asking me to marry you for a debt. You think I'm still that foolish girl who once trusted your blue eyes. Yates drew a steady breath, his words quiet. No, I think you're stronger than I'll ever be, but I also think your heart still longs for someone to stay. The truth of it struck her silent. She would never say it aloud, but the longing had never left her, the hunger for someone to stay, to not walk away. The fire cracked in the stove, sparking light across their faces. A man returned with a proposal no one could have foreseen. A woman abandoned, now standing before a choice that felt impossible. Kala murmured, half to herself, to marry you, would that clear a debt? Or buy back the years you stole? Yates stepped forward once, his voice deep as the night wind off the mountains. Marry me, so we don't have to keep running. The room held its breath. Kala's tears fell, shimmering in the firelight. Her heart was torn between fury and the fragile whisper of hope. Outside, the prairie wind whistled through broken boards, bearing witness to this land where the strong survive and the tender are too often crushed. Yet in that very moment, something stirred. Not acceptance, not forgiveness, but a thin crack of light cutting through despair. Kala said nothing. She turned back to the cold basin, plunging trembling hands into the water, as though hiding from her own thoughts. Her shoulders shook, her eyes closed. But every listener could feel it. Yates's mad proposal had struck deep, carving a wound that would not be forgotten. A mad proposal had been spoken, an old wound torn open. And now, between debt and hope, justice and longing, the air in that smoke-stained room grew thick with choices neither of them could escape. Part 2. The shadows of the past. Night settled over Alder Bend, draping the town in a thin veil of mist. Lanterns swung faintly on crooked porch beams, their glow casting long, wavering shadows across the hard-packed earth. Somewhere down the street, a horse whinnied, the sound carried on the chill air, mingling with the clatter of wagon wheels over worn planks. The town, already hollow by day, now seemed emptied of breath, kept alive only by the weary strains of a piano drifting from the old saloon. Inside the workshop, Kala fed more oil into the lamp. The flame steadied, painting her face in a fragile light that laid bare the lines of hardship carved there. Yates sat silent at the table, hat resting before him, his eyes fixed on the fire, but seeing nothing, only the ghosts of what had come before. You want the truth, Calla's voice broke the silence, dry as desert wind. Yates gave a single nod. She drew a breath, her fingers lacing together, trembling despite her effort to still them. 3 years ago, he left, said he'd find work in Cheyenne. I waited through winter, then spring. When the snow melted, there was nothing. No letters, no word. Just me, 2 children, and an empty house. Her voice faltered, thick with grief, long buried. The lamplight threw her shadow against the wall, bent and shaking, as if her very heart had cracked. Yates closed his eyes, hands tightening on the edge of the table. In his mind, she wasn't only the woman before him, but the girl she had once been. Eyes clear as morning water, a smile that had once convinced him he could belong. Now that same girl lived only as a scar. Do you know what that feels like? Yates. Calla turned, her gaze burning through the dim. To be left behind, to stare at the horizon every day, praying to see someone riding back, and finding only the cold wind. Even the night outside seemed to hush, as though the prairie itself bowed to her grief. She wrapped her arms around herself, holding together what threatened to fall apart. And you think I should marry you? How are you any different from him? Yates lifted his eyes, meeting the storm in hers. You left me too. Yates. Her voice broke, each word like a blade across the room. That night, I stood beneath the cottonwood tree, waiting until the frost soaked my hair. I believed in you more than in myself, but you never came back. You married someone else. You left me in that empty house, fighting hunger, fighting cold, and fighting the whispers of this town. Tears slipped down her cheeks, striking the wooden floor like drops of judgment. For years, she had built walls of grit, born on calloused hands. Tonight, those walls fractured. Yates bowed his head, fingers trembling against his hat. I know, and I carry that guilt. I told myself I left for justice, for country, but the truth is, I was running from myself, and the cost was losing you. Calla let out a ragged laugh through her tears, bitter enough to wound. Justice! What justice is there for nights when my children asked, "Where's Papa?" And I had no answer. The weight of her words fell like a verdict, heavy and final. The door creaked softly. Little Olivia, hair a tumble of copper curls, peeked in. Mama, I'm thirsty. Calla quickly brushed her tears, kneeling to fold her daughter close. The child's warm breath against her neck was pure, almost painful in its innocence. Go back to sleep. Darling, I'll bring you water. Come morning. Olivia rubbed her eyes, then looked curiously toward Yates for a heartbeat. The child's small, cautious stare pinned him where he sat. That sharp little chin. Her mother's likeness was proof of years he had forfeited. When the girl padded away, Calla turned back, her eyes shining in the lamplight. You see, they cannot be left again. I've carried enough abandonment for the three of us. Yates swallowed hard, his voice thick. I won't leave this time. Her answer cut him short, hard as steel. You've said that before. The room sank into silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the wind whistling against the boards, as though the West itself reminded them of its cruelty to fragile hearts. Calla dragged a chair forward, sat opposite him, her gaze blazing through the tears. Do you know what they called me after he left? The cursed woman. The one nobody wanted. I bore their scorn. Worked harder than any man just to keep a roof over my children. And now you come back, offering marriage like a contract, like trading debt for my pride. Tell me, Yates, where do you think my dignity lies? Her words struck deep, twisting in the unhealed wound he carried. I don't want to shame you, he whispered. I only want to mend what I broke. Calla tilted her head back, tears streaming. Some things, Yates, you can't mend. The crack in me isn't from a debt. It's from that night you walked away. The lamplight caught her tears as they slipped across, hands worn by toil. To any listener, it was as if they sat in that room too, hearing the sound of a soul breaking. The night grew heavier. Fog wrapped the town. A dog howled somewhere distant, long and lonesome. Yates rose, moved to the window. He stared out at the road, stretching into darkness, fading toward the mountains. His voice dropped low. I once thought I could make things right by bringing you to safety, new land, a strong roof, but now I know safety isn't in land or timber. It's in someone willing to stay. Calla's eyes lifted, wet but fierce. And are you sure? Yates, sure you can stay this time? The pause stretched long, longer than the wind's cry. He turned, his eyes glinting with firelight. If you'll let me, I'll prove it. Every day I have left. Her lips trembled. Inside her, two forces tore against each other. The terror of being betrayed again, and the desperate hunger to hope for herself, for her children. I don't know if I have enough left to forgive, she whispered, voice raw. He stepped closer, but not near enough to touch. His words hung in the smoky air. Whether you forgive me or not, that's yours to decide. All I ask is a chance to stay. For you, for Olivia, for Owen, that's all I want. Calla turned aside, fingers clutching her worn dress, shoulders trembling. The audience could see it clear. The past still clung to her like a shadow, merciless and heavy. Yet in the trail of her tears glimmered something faint. A crack of light fighting to be born. Her sob broke through at last, carrying the truth like a blade. You left me once, Yates. The words hung in the air like a sentence no court could overturn. And the question, unspoken, lingered heavy as the fog outside. Could a heart once broken ever be brave enough to open again? Part 3. The Light of Dawn. The sun lifted just beyond the distant range, pouring a fragile gold across Alder Bend, painting gray rooftops into shapes of burnished light. A rooster crowed somewhere down the lane, its cry carried with the rattle of wagon wheels over the boards at the far end of town. The saloon windows still held their fog, silent and closed. Only the wind moved, threading the air with the scent of thawing pine and damp earth along the red dust road. On the stoop of the boarding house, Yates sat alone, his hat shadowing half his face. He had not slept. The night had stretched into a lifetime, every hour slicing deeper as he waited. Would Calla choose bitterness, rejection, or some flicker of hope? The door creaked open. Yates looked up. Calla stood there. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. Yet the new morning light caught her features, making them shine clear and unguarded, like a portrait cut from truth itself. She stepped out, her hand gripping the hem of her dress. For a moment, the wind stilled, the birds hushed. Only the two of them remained, separated by a few paces, but truly by 6 years of silence and loss. Calla's gaze met his, steady, though brimming with tears. Her words fell soft, yet they struck like lightning. I'll say yes, but not for the debt. The sound of it cleaved the night inside him, as though those words alone pulled him back into the light. The town seemed to pause. Morning sunlight washed across her cheeks, and the tears there gleamed like dew. Not for the debt, she repeated, voice trembling but firm. I'll say yes, because I want to believe in hope, because I want my children to know someone will stay, not vanish like the shadows before. Yates's hands clenched. His chest ached with the weight of her words, each one hauling him from the abyss and setting his feet back on earth. He stepped forward, then hesitated, halfway to reaching for her hand. Calla. His voice was hoarse, broken. Are you sure? I can't promise wealth, only a patch of stubborn soil and a heart scarred near beyond repair. She shook her head gently, lips trembling into a fragile smile. I don't want gold. I only want a promise that you'll stay. That's enough for me, enough for them. In the newborn light, they seemed to see through the smoke of years the girl who once dreamed beneath the cottonwood, the boy who swore he'd return. Between them flickered a new trust, frail but burning bright. A shutter clattered above. Little Olivia leaned from the window, her hair tangled by the morning wind. Mama, he's still here. Calla looked up at her daughter, then back at Yates, the child's eyes, innocent yet wary, cut sharper than any blade. She had grown too used to absence, to the silence of broken promises. Calla knelt, drawing the girl into her arms. "Listen, Olivia, he won't leave. He'll stay with us." The words bound Yates as much as they soothed the child. His eyes met Olivia's, and for the first time in years, he felt fear, not of death or failure, but of breaking so fragile a faith. He pressed a hand against his chest, bowing low to her. "Your father left, but if you'll allow it, I'll be the man who doesn't." Olivia studied him for a long, still moment, then buried her face into her mother's shoulder. She gave no answer, yet in that silence, the watching hearts understood. It was the first crack of trust waiting to be reborn. Yates turned back to Calla, his voice steady, resolved. "I'll take you and the children to Jefferson Fork. There's an old cabin there." Roof sagged, door near falling, but the land is sound. "I'll raise it up again, same as I mean to raise my life." Calla searched his eyes. For the first time, she saw not pride, not bravado, but humility. No gilded promises, only the willingness to bow to the truth. "You left me once, Yates," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But if you stay this time, I'll stay too." The words split the ice inside them both. Morning spread wider, spilling gold across the dusty road, across the worn shingles, across two figures standing on the threshold of something new. The dawn did not rise, only over Alder Bend. It rose inside their hearts. When the sun climbed higher, they stood side by side. They did not touch, yet the distance between them was gone. Townsfolk began to drift onto the street eyes, curious, whispers rising. Calla no longer cared. She had chosen, not for debt, not for desperation, but because, after years of silence, hope had returned to her chest. Yates pulled on his hat, his hand firm on the reins. "We leave by noon. It'll take 3 days, hard ride to Jefferson Fork. It won't be easy, but we'll make it." Calla nodded. Already the children. No more words were needed. A look, a nod, that was enough to tell the story. Enough for the listeners to know this was a beginning. A hard beginning, yes, but one worth living. The morning wind carried loose scraps of old newsprint down the road. The clink of horseshoes striking the ground echoed sharp in the stillness, and as the sun broke full, their shadows stretched side by side across the street, long and unbroken, like a vow the whole town bore witness to. Calla's voice lingered, trembling, but true. "I'll say yes, but not for the debt." It was release, the first stitch drawn across a torn heart, and the audience feels it deep that in a land this harsh, there is nothing more precious, then a promise to stay. Part 4. The Abandoned Cabin. 3 days' ride across the open prairie. The rhythm of iron shoes striking stone rose steady like the heartbeat of travelers who knew where they were headed. By morning, a veil of mist hung low in the Jefferson Fork Valley. The river, blue as tempered steel, curled sharp around the pines like the blade of a cold knife. The slope down toward the cabin was not steep, but long. Horses blew heavy clouds of breath, leather creaked, and the small wagon rattled with the meager belongings Calla had gathered over a lifetime. A blackened kettle, a worn quilt, a tin of needles and thread, an old weather-stained almanac. The cabin appeared at last at the base of the rise. Its roof sagged toward the east, smoke stains blackening the chimney stone like a bruise. The door hung crooked, timbers gapped wide, moss climbing up the foundation. The porch rail leaned broken, beaten down by storms long past. Yates pulled his reins. Squinting into the fog, he did not mutter, "It's not much, or it will have to do." He only gave a single nod, the kind of nod a man gives when he has decided he will stay, even if the devil himself comes to test him. From beneath a blanket on the horse's back, Owen peered out, eyes wide. "This is our house?" he asked, his voice both doubting and hopeful. Olivia clung to Calla's side, her face smudged with dust, red hair matted with sweat, yet her eyes shone as though lit from within. "Yes," Yates answered, voice deep, softened. "Ours." He dismounted, unfastened the reins, slow, deliberate movements, as though staking a promise into the ground. The cabin door screeched when he pushed it wide. A stale scent rolled out mildew, old ash, damp hides, stirring memories of winters best forgotten. Floorboards groaned beneath his boots. On the table lay a cracked wooden bowl. In the corner, a rusted trap. On the wall, a single nail, where once a man had hung his hat and never returned. Calla stepped in, holding Olivia tight at her hip. She lifted her face toward the rafters, where strands of sunlight slid through broken shingles like threads of gold. That light touched her cheek, tracing every scar pride had left behind. She did not sigh. She simply nodded, rolled her sleeves. "Take the broom. Start in the darkest corner," she said. Owen glanced to Yates. Yates nodded back. The two, man and boy, went to fetch a broom, while Calla threw open the window, letting the wind sweep out the stale air. The river outside moved on without witness. So, would this house, if hands chose to make it live? Beneath the porch, ash, the rangy hound they'd picked up along the road curled in the dust, snorting softly. Above, a crow split the air with a harsh cry, as if stamping the end of the old life and the start of something new. Dust rose in beams of light as Calla swept from wall to center. Each stroke cut through the haze of the past. Olivia followed her mother, damp cloth in hand, scrubbing the sill. "This is where I'll sit and sew," Calla murmured, not to anyone, but as if sketching her place into the bones of the room. Yates lifted the broken door from its hinges, carried it to the shaving bench. His draw knife rasped against wood, long curls falling like shorn hair. Delicate, determined, Owen clutched a hammer, waiting for Yates's nod. "Here," Yates said. The boy set the nail, hammering in steady rhythm. Thock, 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 the heartbeat of a home, finding its pulse again. At the hearth, Calla pulled away old ash and found a small horn button, charred and forgotten. Perhaps it once belonged to a child who had lived here before. She held it in her palm, thumb brushing its surface like soothing a ghost. "Whose was it, Mama?" Olivia asked. "Someone who lived here once." Calla said softly, "Now it's yours. Keep it safe. Don't lose it again." She pressed it into her daughter's hand. A small thing, but it turned the past into something that could be carried outside. The door rehung straight. The breeze slipped in without shrieking. Sweat ran down Yates's back, a thin cut across his hand from the wood. Calla brought him water. "Wash it," she said. When he reached, she held his wrist a moment longer. She dabbed the wound with a cloth, careful, patient, as if mending a torn coat. She knew she couldn't erase the scar, but she could keep it from festering. Owen tripped over an old horse blanket, landing hard. He bit his lip, refusing to cry. Yates bent down, ruffled his hair. "That hurt." The boy shook his head. "I'm tougher than the nail." Yates smiled faintly. Ordinary words, but to Calla, it sounded like prophecy. The nails would hold the wood. Yes, but it was will, not iron, that would keep this house standing. By noon, they ate cold cornbread and drank boiled river water. Ash sprawled on the porch, ears twitching at the crack of a branch deep in the woods. The sky stretched empty. Sunlight, flat over the grass, somewhere in that hour. Each of them marked it quietly. This was not just food to survive the day. This was the first meal together. Night fell heavy as a blanket. The river sang lower, a hymn of the valley. Calla spread blankets, folding coats into pillows for the children. Olivia clutched her horn button beneath her chin, eyes blinking slow. Owen faced the door, as though guarding something unseen. Wind hissed through the roof gaps, carrying the sound of footsteps across shingles. Ash rumbled deep, then sank back into silence. Yates checked the rifle at the door, then sat on the porch rail with his knife, shaving pine wedges to fix a wobbling table leg. Calla leaned against the wall, watching his shadow ripple in the firelight. Years ago, she said, whenever storms came, I'd hang a cloth on the latch, so I'd remember someone might still come home. She pulled a faded square of earth-colored cloth from her things, the last remnant of her youth, and hung it on the nail in the wall. The fabric stirred in the draft, half light, half shadow. Yeats's gaze never left it, as though she'd spoken a prayer. Tomorrow, I'll mud the roof seams, he said, and build a wood rack in that corner. The rest, learn to hear the wind, like the river. Don't let it scare you. He looked toward the sleeping children. Calla smiled faintly. The wind doesn't frighten children who've had to grow too soon. The fire sank to embers. Yeats carved a small mark into the porch rail. Day 1, not to count endurance, but to honor beginning. He set his hand against the wood, eyes closed. A silent vow. The forest sighed. Stars broke through torn clouds. In the cabin, thick with smoke and pine resin, an old house began to live again, built not just of wood and nails, but of staying. Morning came clear, light falling fine as flour over the yard. Yeats carried a hoe to the back slope, mapping rows with a taut string. Here, he said, staking the line. Calla dug beside him, her cracked hands turning soil as though summoning life itself. They mixed ash into the earth, plucked stones, opened seed packets of corn, cabbage, squash. Olivia scattered kernels like prayers. Owen tamped the edges firm, biting his lip in concentration. Not too close, Kalia reminded, let the seed breathe. She knew the worth of patience. Yeats watched, sweat darkening his shirt, a rare smile tugging at his jaw. He could split timber, set posts, but she knew how to coax life from the ground. By evening, Yeats and Owen drove fence posts along the tree line, wire strung taut, its twang sharp in the quiet. Ash pricked his ears, growling low. From the pines, a gray shape slid out, a gaunt wolf, hackles raised, eyes burning gold. It halted, testing the air smell of men, of dog, of fire. Owen clutched Yeats's hand. Don't move, Yeats whispered, voice steady as wind. Calla came running with her hoe, standing firm on the other side. They did not look at each other, but their stances lined together in a single wall. The wolf bared its teeth, then slipped back into the trees, silent as smoke. The breath left them only when the forest swallowed it whole. Owen whispered, I was scared. Yeats set a hand on his shoulder. Good. Fear means you know what's worth guarding. Calla sank to the earth, laughing softly through tears, not for the wolf, but for the sight of them, 3 souls, standing shoulder to shoulder, a line drawn, not in words, but in instinct. And she believed then the seeds in the ground would take root That night, they hung old tin cans on the wire fence to rattle if something pressed near. Calla kneaded cornmeal dough, folding and pressing, as though mending a broken story. Olivia counted aloud, not numbers, but hope. Owen honed a knife until Yates touched his shoulder, sharp enough. A blade too sharp cuts its owner. The boy nodded, tucking it away, pride balanced with trust. The cabin filled with the sweet smell of baking cornbread. Beans simmered with wild mint. They ate at the crooked table, now steady under Yates's wedge. Ash begged scraps underfoot, spoons, tapped bowls, and talk turned only to roofs, beds, and fences. When the children slept, Yates brought Calla a basin of warm water. She lowered her cracked hands, sighing as the heat softened them. He studied those hands, the hands that had mended shirts, carried children, and were now mending a home. Tomorrow I'll fetch pine from the north ridge, he said. I'll patch the roof, she replied. Owen can help with the tar cloth. Then she looked up. Yates. Yes. His answer was quiet. I'm not doing this because of the debt. You know that. I know. I'm doing it because I'm tired of living like a shadow. A faint smile crossed her lips in the firelight. And because, when you stood outside the boarding house that morning, I saw the man I once waited for, not the boy who left. Yates said nothing. He stepped onto the porch, stars glimmering above the valley, the river whispering like scripture. He carved another notch into the rail. First supper, he hung his hat on the old nail beside Calla's cloth. The act was simple, hanging a hat, but it filled the room like a vow. This was where it would rest every night. This was where a man would return. Calla's eyes glistened. She said nothing, but her breath caught. Inside, fire crackled low. The hound curled. The fence tins rattled faintly in the breeze. 4 hearts beat not to survive, but to belong. On the wall, a cloth and a hat hung side by side. On the rail, 3 carved marks darkened the grain. And outside, the Jefferson Fork kept flowing, waiting. It seemed all along for a house brave enough to burn its light. Part 5. Small hands. At first light, the sun rose pale and gold over the cabin roof, still wet with dew. Yates was already on the porch, coat stripped off, a hammer in hand. Beside him stood Owen, his eyes bright, though his small hands trembled. Want to learn? Yates asked, his voice low, steady. Owen swallowed hard, then nodded. Yates laid a plank across the rail, pulled a nail from his pocket. He lifted the hammer, not striking yet, but holding it high, so the boy could see. It's not about strength, he said. It's about the way you hold it. Keep the nail straight, and the hammer will fall true. He placed the tool In Owen's hands, the boy gripped it awkwardly, the weight clumsy. From the doorway, Calla's chest tightened at the sight, but she didn't step in. Yates crouched low, his broad hand settling on the boy's shoulder, solid as old timber. "Don't be afraid. Just try a tap." Owen bit his lip, lifted the hammer, swung. The first strike missed, scraping the edge with a sharp clang. His eyes welled, nearly spilling tears. Yates said nothing, only covered the boy's hand with his own. "We'll do it together." The next strike hit true. The nail sank a fraction, small but sure. Owen's face lit with wonder. Yates eased back, letting the boy drive it the rest of the way. Slow, careful, each blow, more certain than the last. When it was set deep, Yates smiled, clapped his shoulder. "See, you did it." Owen stared at the nail as if it were a miracle. His shining eyes flicked toward Calla. She pressed a hand to her chest, holding herself together. One small nail, but it marked the first bridge between a boy and a man under the same roof. Inside, Calla stacked kindling in the stove. Olivia crouched at her side, eyes bright as embers. "I want to try," she said. Calla hesitated, then nodded. "Starting a fire isn't play, but if you want to learn, you'll do it right." Through the window, Yates watched silently. Olivia placed the twigs carefully, fumbling, but determined. "Leave space for the air." Calla guided gently. "Don't pack it too tight." The girl struck a match. The flame flared, then died. Her face pinched. Again, Calla encouraged softly. The second caught, the tiny flame licking the twigs until they glowed. Olivia gasped, eyes wide, breath quick. She blew gently, coaxing the fire alive. Smoke stung her eyes, made her cough. Calla rubbed her back, but let her keep on. "There," Calla whispered, "your first fire." Olivia turned to the window. Yates nodded once, pride flickering in his eyes. The girl beamed, her smile glowing brighter than the lamp smoke around her. In the hard country, fire meant life, and Calla knew in that moment her daughter had crossed a threshold, learning not only to keep warm, but to stand beside her mother in the daily fight. By evening, the cabin was filled with the smell of beans simmered with dried meat. Calla stirred the pot, her eyes soft. As she watched the children, Olivia sliced cornbread with a small knife. Owen sat with Yates, steadying a crooked shelf with his freshly driven nails. Everyone had their work, no complaints. The clang of spoons, the tap of hammer on wood, the hiss of fire all came together like a humble music. When they sat to eat, Calla paused, looking at the table. For the first time in years, she saw not just herself and two children huddled in silence, but a man seated across, head bowed slightly as he waited for her to serve. his gaze tender on the children. Her throat closed, her eyes blurred. She remembered nights when the only question at the table was whether there'd be anything left for tomorrow. Now, even with only beans and cornbread, the room was full. Owen fumbled, then pushed a piece of meat toward Yates. For you. Yates's eyes lit. He took it in both hands. He didn't correct the boy, didn't demand the word father. He only said, softly, "Thank you, son." The words struck like a bell. Calla dropped her spoon, covered her face. Olivia's small hand reached across the table to hold her mother's. The audience feels it, the tender, breaking moment when a poor meal becomes a feast of belonging. That night, the fire leapt in the stove while the wind outside roared like a wild beast. The four of them sat close. Olivia held her rag doll tight. Owen whittled a toy knife from pine. Yates sharpened his real blade on a stone. "Tell a story," Olivia whispered. Yates froze. He was no teller of tales, but her expectant eyes made him draw breath. Once there was a cowboy who rode far, too far. In every town he passed, he left something behind: a pair of boots, a friend, a piece of his heart. By the time he came back, there was nothing left but ashes. Owen's voice piped, and then Yates's gaze lifted to Calla, firelight catching the ice blue of his eyes. Then he found a fire that didn't die, small but steady, and he knew if he stayed, that fire would become a home. Olivia smiled faintly, hugging her doll closer. Calla turned away, tears slipping free. She knew it was no fable. It was his confession, his vow. The wind clawed at the walls, but inside, the flame burned warm, patient, alive. The next day, Yates carved a new shelf. He called Owen over. "Hold it steady. You're going to leave your mark here." The boy's eyes widened. Yates mixed clay and pine sap, pressed the child's small hand into it. When Owen pulled away, his handprint remained permanent in the wood. "This is your home," Yates said. "No one can take it away." Olivia darted in. "Me too." She pressed her own hand beside her brother's, two tiny prints side by side, like wildflowers rooted in dry earth. Calla's lips trembled. She had feared her children would never know what it meant to belong, but now Yates' scarred hands had carved it into wood. That night, he marked the porch rail again. Handprints, another line in the wordless journal of a home reborn. Later, Calla stepped onto the porch, running her fingers across the carved marks. Tears rolled, but her smile was quiet, steady. In the dark, she whispered, "Thank you for teaching them where they belong," and the listeners feel it, their hearts sinking, then rising, understanding that with each nail, each flame, each hand pressed into wood, a new family was taking root. From the first nail, the first spark, the first shared meal, the first story, to the first handprints in wood. Everything was bound together by small hands, and the audience weeps because they know in that wild country nothing is more sacred than a family being born. Part 6. The Confession. Night fell heavy over the Jefferson Fork Valley. Wind threaded through the pines. The river droned like a hymn, steady, weighty, endless. Inside the cabin, the stove glowed red. Firelight brushed across rough walls, settling into cracks like a blanket drawn over old scars. Olivia and Owen slept soundly, their small hands still stained with afternoon mud from patching the roof. Ash, the hound, lay curled at the foot of the bed, twitching now and then at the snap of a twig outside. By the hearth, Calla sat sewing a torn hem, her needle rising and falling in steady rhythm. On the table, a pot whispered, mint-scented steam drifting through the room. Out on the porch, Yates's hat still hung beside Calla's earth-colored cloth. Two lifeless things that seemed to murmur together. Yates leaned against a post, knife in hand, whittling a small wedge. Truth be told, it wasn't the wood that needed shaping, but the tremor in his fingers. Every slice of the blade called back other nights, other fires' flames, meant to burn away memories too heavy to keep. Back doorpost needs replacing tomorrow, he said suddenly, his words like a pebble tossed into still water. Calla didn't look up. After a moment, she laid the needle aside, turning the fabric in her hands. Owen asked me why the wind cries. I told him it only wails through the gaps. Seal the gaps, and it goes quiet. Yates gave a thin smile. His gaze drifted to the children's sleeping forms. I reckon grown folks are the same. Leave a crack inside, and the wind never stops. Calla's eyes flicked to his, then quickly away, as though afraid the words might spill if she lingered too long. She poured 2 cups of tea, pushed one across the table. The steam rose between them, pine-sweet and warm. It's been a long while since this house has known peace, she murmured. Peace, but not yet quiet. Yates answered, I can still hear the wind. The fire hissed, then settled into a long hush. Calla clasped her hands together, her voice clear, though soft. All right, tonight we say it plain. No more letting the wind speak for us. Yates set down his knife, facing her fully. The lamplight bared every line of her face. Hardness, hurt, but courage too. He gave a slow nod. Say it. Then, you told me you left to do what was right. She began, her words drawn like thread through old cloth. But right for who? The country, your pride, or just the recklessness of youth? Yates did not flinch. For fear, he said, throat raw. I was afraid of being small, afraid a home would see too much weakness in me. So I ran into the cavalry, into gunfire, into noise loud enough. I didn't have to hear myself. He drew a breath, heavy. I married once, down south, thought if I built a new frame, I wouldn't have to face the one I'd broken. But winter fever took her quick and left me with nothing but a mirror. I was a runner, no matter the place. Kala's fingers tightened in her lap. Rumors had cut her like cactus spines. Tonight she heard it from his own mouth, not to wound her, but to draw the thorn at last. After that, Yates went on, eyes fixed in the fire. I quit the regiment. My father died. The farm went to ruin. I thought I could mend it with my hands, but every night I lay down, I saw faces I'd left behind, yours, among them, waiting under the cottonwood. Folks say men grow used to silence. They lie, silence kills slow. From the woods, an owl called, its cry folding into the wind, and the bottle, Kala asked, flat, unflinching. Yes, Yates admitted, for a time. Then I remembered what you told me once about your father. I was terrified I'd turn into him. I quit, started hanging my hat by the bed each night, a way to nail myself to staying put. That's why I hung it here. First night in this cabin, she rose, walked to the wall, touched hat and cloth together on the old nail. You've spoken your part, she said, turning, her gaze steady. Now mine. She drew breath, bracing herself like one stepping into a cold river. One winter night, the wind ripped the door open. Olivia burned with fever. Owen shivered in rags. I screamed till my voice was gone. No neighbor came. I burned the last scrap of wood. Then the wooden horse his father had carved. In the morning, Owen asked, "Where's my horse?" I told him it had turned to fire to keep him warm. That was the night I broke. Her voice cracked, tears shining. The next day I stood at the food line, ledger in hand. Folks stared. One man whispered, "There's quicker ways to pay a debt." I left, went home, boiled plain water, told the children it was soup. She gave a thin, bitter laugh. There was no smell, but steam. Yates reached, then stilled his hand. Some shames could only be touched when the bearer allowed. Kala held her hands to the fire, scarred from needle and soil. I wrote you after that night, not because I believed you'd come, but because if you didn't, I'd know. I'd hit the end of what my heart could endure. Women like me are taught to wait for everything but themselves. I was done waiting. Yates's chest heaved. I read those words, please. For the children, they've gripped me every day since. I lived like a man drowning. That line pulled me up. Kala's gaze softened. I know you've changed, not because of what you say, because of what you don't. You never asked me to call you husband, never forced the children to call you father. You let your hand speak first. She drew a long breath, steadying her courage. So tonight, I'll speak the hardest part. Her thumb rubbed nervously over her palm. I hated you, Yates, for years. I built you into a shadow to pour my sleepless nights into. I told myself, if he ever comes back, I'll close the door. A wry smile broke through her tears. That morning at the inn, the door opened. Yates made a sound, rough as breaking coal. The fire popped, sparks leaping from a drawer. She pulled a folded cloth, opened it. Inside lay a faded ribbon, yellowed with age. I wore this in my hair the night you left. She held it out. Keep it, not as a keepsake, as a binding. When your hand feels ready to let go, tie it tighter. His fingers trembled as he took it, light as breath, heavy as judgment. I will, he said simply, not as a vow, but as a fact. Calla's voice fell low, soft as string pulled across wood. Yates, you're not just saving me, you need saving too. The words landed in the room, unmoving, undeniable, not accusation, but a key. Then the storm struck. A gust slammed the cabin, rattling the roof. The tar cloth snapped, a corner tearing loose. Ash leapt up barking. The children stirred. Yates seized his coat. The roof. I'll hold the ladder. Calla called. Outside. The wind clawed like a hand. Yates climbed, shoulders braced, rope in his grip. Calla held the lantern high, shielding the flame with her palm, light spilling over him. As he fought the boards, a sheet of tin screeched loose, slicing his palm. Blood sprang dark. Yates, Calla cried, then steadied. Can you hold? Holden, he shouted back, teeth clenched, binding the rope, dragging the roofing into place. Below, she anchored the ladder with her own body, unshaken, despite the gale tearing at her hair. Tears stung, half from wind, half from fear, but her hands did not falter. Done, he roared, sliding down. The wind shoved him into her. They nearly fell, clung, then steadied. Inside, Owen sat upright. Mama, it's all right, Calla soothed. Back to sleep, and strangely, her own heart slowed at the sound of her own calm voice. On the porch, Yates slumped, blood dripping from his torn hand. Calla knelt, lantern set aside. She washed the cut, pulled out splinters, wrapped it with her cloth. Her touch was firm but tender, like mending a coat, knowing the scar would remain, but infection could be kept at bay. She blew softly across the wound, a gesture born of countless times. She had calmed pain. His hardened chest softened at the feel. Does it hurt? She asked. Yes, he said, faint smile tugging, but not like before. That hurt was where no one could see. She placed her calloused palm over his, scar to scar, then let me see it. Her voice carved the words into him. You're not just saving me, you need saving too. His breath broke loose, deep, like a man breaking the surface of water. He leaned his brow to hers, not a kiss, but the weary meeting of two lives too long apart. The storm eased. Clouds tore, stars spilled bright. Inside, the children turned in their sleep. The hound sighed. Back by the hearth, Kala poured more tea. Yates bound the ribbon to his wrist, a knot not tight enough to choke, but firm enough to hold. So, I'll remember, he murmured, when my hand wants to let go. Kala smiled faintly, firelight in her eyes. Tomorrow, you'll teach Owen to tie a knot. I'll teach Olivia to stitch a straight seam. Each of us will keep a thread. Yates nodded. He stepped to the porch rail, carved a fresh mark beside the old ones. Day 1, the fence, first supper, handprints. Now another, the ribbon. Kala came to stand behind him, her hands resting gently on his arms, her cheek against his worn shoulder. This is what I want remembered, she whispered. Not the storm, but the knot tied after the storm. Yates reached into the drawer, brought out a small copper ring, worn thin, initials faded. It was my mother's. I won't wait for a wedding day to give it. Take it, not as a promise, but as a tool. When I forget, use it to unfasten me. She slipped it on a thin cord, hid it beneath her blouse. Not jewelry, she echoed softly, smiling through tears. A tool to open. Later, they bent together over his hand-drawn map, the North Ridge for timber, the dry creek bed for posts. She marked where the chicken coop would stand. He pointed to the patch for winter alfalfa. Their words were plain, not confessions, but plans tomorrow's work, not yesterday's wounds. The night pressed close, but no longer smothering. On the wall, hat and cloth hung side by side. On his wrist, the ribbon knot held firm. Beneath her blouse, the copper ring, warm to her skin. On the bed, two children breathed steady as seeds watered at last. Before banking the fire low, Kala murmured to herself, tomorrow, I'll move the bed closer to the stove. The cold won't reach as far, and I'll raise the frame a notch. Yates answered gently, ease your back. They both smiled, the kind that comes only when two people see each other's cracks and do not turn away. Outside, the Jefferson fork whispered on the porch rail, the fresh cut still raw. In their hearts, a new cord had been tied, not binding too tight, but strong enough to hold. And somewhere in the wind, an old voice faded at last, leaving space for the clink of spoons, the hush of children's breath, and the quiet confession that saving and being saved had become the same thing. Under one roof, Part 7, The Flame of Love. Night spread over Jefferson Fork, like a heavy indigo blanket. Inside the cabin, the stove whispered, throwing amber light against the log walls, drawing the room close in its warm embrace. Outside, wind hissed through the pines, but here within, only the breaths of 4 souls could be heard. 2 children sunk deep in sleep, a hound breathing steady on the floor, and 2 grown hearts sitting in silence, as though afraid to stir the past awake. Yates sat at the table, sharpening a dulled knife, sparks flickering at each stroke. But in truth, another fire had kindled in him, burning since the moment Calla pressed her hand against his wound the night before. For the first time in years, her eyes had held not only reproach, but understanding, and that was something he never thought himself worthy of. Across from him, Calla sat in her worn brown dress, hair falling loose over her shoulders, hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea. Her gaze lingered on him, then darted away whenever his eyes lifted. Her heart beat slow but heavy, like a drum before battle one last fight, this time with her own heart. The fire snapped, embers scattering. A gust rattled the roof seams, throwing their shadows wild across the walls. In that flickering light, Yates raised his eyes and caught hers. There was no place left to hide. He set the knife down, voice rough but steady. "Calla, from this day, I don't want us just to share a roof. I want to share my life with you. Truly." The words struck like a hammer driving into wood, already waiting for the nail. Calla trembled. She didn't answer at once, but something deep inside, some door, long closed, swung open to the heat of the fire. She set her cup down, porcelain clicking softly on wood. Firelight danced in her eyes, both bright and uncertain. "You know," she began, voice low. "For 6 years, I told myself if I ever saw you again, I'd turn my back. And yet," her hand pressed against her chest, "when you stood at the boarding house door that morning, I saw the girl I once was, the girl who still believed a man could come home." Yates listened, every word striking him like bullets, yet each one somehow mending instead of breaking. "I'm tired." "Yates," Calla whispered, eyes shining. "Tired of fighting the wind alone, but I'm afraid, too afraid to believe, afraid to lose again. Yet day by day, you stayed, and I see now." Her lips trembled. "You weren't only saving me. You needed me to live." His heart throbbed sharp and sweet, rising slowly. He crossed the room, each step falling like nails, anchoring him to her. He stopped in front of her, shadow wrapping over her in the glow of the fire. "Yes," he breathed, "I need you. I need this home. I need your eyes on me, to remind me I'm not just a lost man." Calla lifted her gaze, Their eyes locked, and firelight washed their cheeks red. Binding them in one flame, she raised a thin, trembling hand and set it against his chest. His heartbeat surged strong beneath her palm. The room seemed to hold its breath, the audience hearing their own hearts echo in the hush. The quiet music of two souls finding each other again. Yates caught her hand, lifted it, and pressed a kiss against it. Her fingers were cracked, rough, scarred from work and winters. But to him, they were the most beautiful hands in the world. The hands that had sewn clothes, mended wounds, lit fires, and held children. These scars, he murmured, they're proof you never gave up. I'd kiss everyone. Calla gave a small, shaky laugh, half shy, half trembling. The sound was soft as wool, pulling the fire closer. Don't say words that don't fit you, she chided gently. I've never fit with words, Yates said, his eyes deep as a canyon. But with you, I want to learn. She shivered as he bent, pressing a kiss to the back of her hand. Not passion, but covenant, like a mark carved in wood, silent but lasting. The stove crackled, ashes swirled like sparks of burning flowers. Olivia turned in her sleep but stilled. Owen sighed, clutching his wooden knife. Calla looked at her children, her heart folding soft. Then she turned back to Yates and whispered, if you promise to stay, then I won't run either. He gripped her hand firmly. There's no road left for me but here. Even if this land turns against us, I'll stay with you. They faced each other in that poor cabin, firelight between them, wind shrieking outside. Yet here, another flame quieter, fiercer was burning, the flame of love, consuming fear, binding brokenness. The hour grew late. Darkness pressed heavy on the roof, but inside, the glow held them close. Calla's hand rested in Yates's. They spoke no more, letting their hearts and the wind speak for them. Yates, she said at last, voice trembling but resolute. I don't want half a life. If you're staying, then I don't want us bound only by debt. I want us bound as man and wife. Her words struck him like fire against his chest. He stilled, then leaned close, his brow resting against hers. Are you certain? Certain, she whispered. Not for debt, not for fear, but because I choose. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. All his life, he had been chosen for battles, for duties, for burdens, but never before had he been chosen as someone's home. And now, at last, he heard it. I choose you. He pulled her into his arms, holding tight, not with haste, not with hunger, but with the deep, quiet sigh of two lives, finally allowed to rest in each other. The fire snapped softly. He kissed her hair. From tonight, I'm your husband, not in name, not in debt, just me. And you? Together. Calla's tears slid warm down her cheeks, but her lips curved. For the first time, their hearts owed nothing but love enough to burn away the years lost. That night, the stove was banked low, embers glowing faint. But another fire burned brighter in the room. It needed no words, no haste, only breath, eyes, and an embrace strong enough to say, "We are home." Calla touched his face, trembling. "You're no hero. I don't need one. I just need this man here, and staying." Yates pressed her hand to his chest. "And I need this woman scarred, tested, but still carrying the fire." They chose each other in silence. No preacher, no papers, witnessed only by the fire's glow, the hum of the Jefferson fork, and two children sleeping in peace when moonlight slipped through the roof slats and touched their faces. Both knew this was a beginning, a flame of love, not loud, not showy, but strong enough to burn away the cold of the past and light the road ahead. From that night on, they were no longer just two survivors. They were a family, choosing each other in hardship, in the harshness of the West, and in a love that would endure. Part 8. The Wedding Beneath the Cottonwood. Morning settled over Jefferson Fork with a silver breath, mist curling thick across the valley floor. The first ray of sun threaded through the pines and touched the old cottonwood that leaned along the riverbank, its trunk split with age, moss draping like a faded green shawl time had left behind. Yates rose early, sitting on the porch steps, scraping a worn blade across his jaw. The light caught his cheek with a warm bronze glow. The soft clink of his spurs against the planks seemed different today. Not the sound of a man riding into storm, but the beat of a drum calling kin together. Inside, Calla spread a cream muslin cloth across the table, sewing the last hem of a simple dress. There was no lace, only clean stitches, straight, steady, as if breath itself had been woven into the fabric. Olivia sat across, binding wildflowers dried in the sun, dandelion, mountain daisy, a sprig of mint. "I'll make you a crown, Mama," she whispered, tongue peeking out in concentration. On the porch, Owen sat beside Yates, sanding the crack in a broken belt buckle. From time to time, his eyes drifted toward the man's hat, hanging where it always did, because a man belongs wherever he leaves his hat, son. Yates said softly, "Today you stand beside me, not because I'm the man of this house, but because you are the other man of it." Owen's chin lifted, his grip tightening on the wood rail. Yates handed him a strip of leather. "When the time comes, you'll tie this round my wrist to remind me to stay." Out in the yard, Ash came trotting up, tail wagging, carrying a small cottonwood branch he'd scavenged, laying it at Calla's feet. like an offering. She paused, tears almost welling, because sometimes the small gifts of living strike deeper than flowers or songs. She bent to rub the dog's ears. All right, Ash, you'll be a witness too. By mid-morning, dust rose on the trail. Reverend Haynes appeared astride an old mule, cloak patched and frayed, a cracked Bible pressed against his ribs. He stopped at the gate, folding his hands in greeting, eyes weary but kind. The Lord favors beginnings that are small, he rasped, voice worn by years of winter sermons. Yates tipped his hat. Reverend, we've little more than a tree, a river, and a handful of souls. That's enough for any wedding. Haynes smiled. Calla stepped out in her muslin dress, hair tied back with half a ribbon, the ribbon Yates had worn at his wrist the night before, now split in two, one piece in her hair, the other waiting for his hand. Sunlight traced her cheek like a blessing. Yates's chest ached with the sight, proof that beauty on a wedding day was not measured by silk or silver, but by a woman who had weathered storms and still stood warm as sunlit earth. Before they walked down the slope, Yates drew his knife and carved a new mark into the porch rail. Wedding morning. The blade bit deep, like nailing a promise into timber. They gathered beneath the cottonwood, where its shadow sprawled across damp sand. The river ran steady, its back glinting steel blue. Reverend Haynes placed the Bible on a root, wedging it level with the point of Yates's knife. He patted the book, eyes on the water. This is a good place. Still water doesn't mean it isn't moving. Love is like that, quiet but strong. Owen stood tall at Yates's side, leather cord in hand. Olivia clutched a tin can filled with blossoms, eyes shining as though ready to release a cloud of butterflies. Ash lay close by the roots, chest heaving in rhythm with his master. Two neighbors arrived, shyly leaving cornbread and a jar of wild berry jam. Blessings, they said, stepping back, not to intrude. Reverend opened the book, his voice low and steady. I haven't come to bind you with words, but to call true what already is. His eyes met Yates. Son, what do you bring? Yates pulled from his pocket a thin copper ring, worn, its inside scratched with faint letters nearly gone. He held it in his palm and looked to Calla. I once told you this was just a tool to untie the knots I'd forgotten, but today it opens another door, the door into your home. The Reverend nodded, turning to Calla. And you, child, what do you bring? She lifted the half of her ribbon, a binding for his hand, for when it feels like letting go. The Reverend closed his book, offering no long sermon. He looked at them, two souls weathered into truth. Then speak in the language of this land. Yates drew a deep breath. Wind tugged his coat, carrying the smell of pine and cold water. He did not speak vows, dressed in finery. He spoke slow, plain, true. I see you, and I am here. Calla's gaze held his, piercing through all the winters behind them. I don't ask you to save me. I ask you to stay. She clasped his scarred hand. I see you, and I am here. The Reverend's lined face softened. That is the justice of the heart, he murmured. When the broken choose each other, heaven and earth stand witness. He touched Bible, then tree, sealing it, what has long been true. I declare, husband and wife. Olivia tipped her tin, spilling a shower of petals yellow, white, lavender, like ashes of an old sorrow, turning sweet. Owen tied the leather cord tight around Yates's wrist. To make you remember, he said solemnly. Yates placed a hand on the boy's head. I will, the river whispered. The leaves shivered, all sound turned to chorus for this small justice of the heart. Yates slid the copper ring onto Calla's finger. The band was dull, weathered, but it seemed born to rest there. She gazed at it, then lifted it to her lips, kissing not gold nor finery, but labor, lack, and all that life had scarred them with. I have nothing to give, she whispered, but the rest of my days, enough for me. Yates said. The Reverend cleared his throat, swallowing his own tears. Would you place your trust now? Together, they laid their hands against the cottonwood's rough bark. Yates bowed his forehead to it. If we forget, let these roots remind us that staying is the only way to grow. Calla added, soft but firm. If we fear, let these leaves remind us that trembling is still living. The Reverend stepped back. Do now what the Lord asks least of all, kiss. Their kiss was light, like setting a stone back where it belonged. Breath meeting. Breath among pine and river scent. Olivia clapped, petals flying into her hair. Owen turned away for a heartbeat, then looked back, standing straighter. Ash gave a single bark, as if signing his mark. A gust rippled the river, rolling waves against their boots and Calla's hem, as though the water itself nodded. I see you. I am here. Yates picked up a smooth white stone, cutting a shallow line across its face with his knife. No words, only a mark, soft as grass, bent by wind. He handed it to Calla. For your hand, when it needs holding, it is the stillness of water. She tucked it in her dress pocket, heavy and light at once. She leaned to him, whispering, when we get home, carve another mark. I will, Yates said, eyes bright as flint catching flame. The day turned golden as they spread a rough cloth under the cottonwood. Reverend Haynes broke the cornbread in 4, passing it with solemn care. This bread is the earth's share. This jam is the summer kept for winter. He opened the jar. the sweet sour scent rising like a small bell. Olivia dabbed her nose with jam. Giggling, Owen chewed slow, aware that every bite meant more than hunger. It meant remembering this day. Reverend sipped boiled river water, winced at its tang, then smiled. Living water is never easy to drink, but it wakes the soul. Yates tore off a piece, placed it in Calla's hand. As always, his hands spoke first. I am here. She broke it in half, offering back to him. Her lips curved. And I am here. The neighbors slipped away, leaving a bundle of straw for a chicken coop. Calla's eyes filled, not for the gift, but for the knowing. They were no longer outside every door. Even the hard gates of the West shifted open for those who knocked with kindness. Reverend gathered his Bible, mounting the mule once more. Remember this, he said, voice fading. The laws of men will change, but the justice of the heart does not. You've done the hardest thing, chosen each other. When he disappeared beyond the hill, the air turned cooler. Yates laid his coat across Calla's shoulders. She leaned her head briefly against him until the children's laughter drew them back. Let them play. Yates said, today, the world is safe. Owen stacked driftwood into a small raft. Olivia set her last flower upon it, pushing it out. It floated a few feet, then sank, and both laughed so hard their eyes watered not from sorrow, but from joy unbroken. Calla watched, throat tight. It had been too many years since her children's tears came from laughter. Time to go, Yates said gently. He clasped Calla's hand, slung an arm around Owen, while Olivia ran ahead with Ash chasing her. Distant hoofbeats echoed down the ridge like evening bells. The valley bathed in honey light as the cabin came into view, small, but rooted like a nailed post. Yates placed the Bible on the shelf beside Olivia's horn button and Calla's white stone, 3 keepsakes, forming one heart. On the wall, his hat and her ribbon hung side by side, as if guarding the doorway. Sir, Owen stammered, then gathered courage. Shall we carve it now? Yates smiled. We shall. On the porch, he set knife to rail, drawing a clean stroke. Wedding day. He stood still, eyes on the 6 marks first day. The fence, first supper, handprints. The ribbon, wedding day. Each notch was a stake holding the house in place. Calla traced the new line with her finger, as if touching a fresh scar stitched shut. Her eyes brimmed. Her mouth smiled. That night she stirred a thicker stew, her voice calm and ordinary. The sweetest sound of a new life. Olivia set bowls. Owen laid out spoons. Yates washed his hands, touching the ribbon at his wrist, damp with sweat, but tied firm. He nodded to himself, greeting it like an old friend. After supper, They slid the table aside. No music, no banjo, only the wind's hush as their band. Yates reached out, half teasing. "Mrs. Cade," he rasped. Calla laughed softly. "Say it again, Mrs. Cade." She placed her hand in his. They stepped slow on the creaking boards, off beat at first, then falling into rhythm. Olivia hopped circles around them, giggling. Owen leaned cool against the wall, trying to hide his grin, shoulders rocking in a silent tune. Ash shifted in his sleep, tail thumping once in the dust. When the fire burned low, Calla lifted Olivia's flower crown and hung it on the nail beside the hat and ribbon. "For the days we forget, we'll look here," she said. Yates pressed his forehead to hers. Today, the justice of the heart was spoken aloud. He whispered, "Tomorrow, we'll live by it." Calla touched the ring on her finger, eyes shining. "Tomorrow," she answered, "we'll start with a chicken coop. Even justice needs a roof." Night spilled ink over the valley. Wind moved through, but the cracks had all been sealed with mud, with nails, with rope, with scars, with love. Jefferson Fork sang on, its voice low and steady, like a lullaby. On the porch, 6 carved notches glowed faint in the firelight. A record not of words, but of hands. Before Yates doused the lamp, he turned once more to the rail, eyes on the marks. He asked for nothing grand. He only whispered, "To wood, to river, to sky, I see you, and I am here." Inside, Calla drew the quilt over her children, her hand lingering on their warm brows. She looked upward, smiling faintly. The justice of the heart had been sealed not only by the cottonwood, not only by the river, but here at the fire of their own hearth, and in a land as hard as the West. That was miracle enough to believe in. Part 9. The house alive. Spring drifted away, and summer came pouring gold across the valley of Jefferson Fork. The little cabin, once weathered and frail, now wore an added room at its side. Its roof was patched, its walls more solid, its bones beginning to feel like home. Out front, the garden rose broke through with green, tender shoots, reaching skyward. Yates drove posts into the ground, the hammer echoing steady, his scarred hands working with a peace he had long been denied. At the far row, Calla crouched low, skirts brushing the earth, her palms filled with cool, damp soil. Olivia ran circles, squealing, holding up an earthworm like it was a treasure from the deep. Owen lingered close to his father, eyes bright, watching every post fall straight and true. "Bob, can I try?" Owen asked, voice pitched with hope. Yates placed the hammer in his boy's hand, his own larger hand covering it. "Not too hard. Let the wood listen first." The first swing went crooked, ringing sharp against the post. But the second landed clean, the nail biting deep. Owen laughed aloud, pride spilling out of him. As he looked back to his mother, Calla's lips curved, her heart softening at the sight. Olivia gathered a clutch of wildflowers and set them in the corner of the fence to give the garden some color. She sang. Calla drew her close, brushing tangled hair from her forehead. Yes, even flowers need this soil. By evening, they sat together on the porch. The scent of fresh earth mingled with wood smoke, children's laughter trailing into the chorus of crickets. Yates rested quiet a long while before drawing his knife to the rail and carving a new line, first planting a small mark, but it named a beginning, not shelter borrowed from chance, but a place made alive by their hands. Mornings broke with slow melting fog. Sunlight scattered diamonds across the meadow. Yates led the horse from its stall, Owen trailing behind, clutching a small saddle. Let me ride just once." For the first time, the boy spoke the word, "Pa." Yates faltered, a lump catching in his throat, then nodded with a husky smile. "All right, but I'll keep the reins." The boy climbed up, slight frame held tall, gripping the horn. The horse walked steady circles, hooves drumming the soil, Owen's laughter ringing free. Calla stood in the doorway, hand pressed to her chest, eyes glistening. Olivia dashed barefoot through dew, shouting for her turn, and Yates swept her into the saddle, setting her before Owen. The children's laughter tangled together, bright and fearless, echoing off the valley walls. Calla could not help but remember the opposite picture. Long nights carrying one child on her back, the other clinging close, searching wood in winter winds, no laughter strong enough to break that silence. Yet here it was now, spilling like bells across the yard, declaring to heaven and earth, "We have a home." Later, when the horse was cooled and blanketed, Owen helped lift the saddle. Olivia carried water, small things, simple things, but each etched a memory into their young hearts of a family that worked side by side, with no one left behind. Yates cut another mark into the rail. First, laughter. The line wavered slightly, for his hand still trembled from the depth of it, but it pressed deep, a scar, to last as long as wood. That evening, Calla stirred beans and salted meat in the pot, adding wild greens and the first carrots pulled from their patch. The smell filled the cabin, mixing with the sound of children running in circles. Yates hauled a rough-hewn table into place, calling them in. Olivia set a jar of wildflowers in the center. Owen placed his horn button beside it as if it were a talisman. Calla paused, bowl in hand, staring at the scene. 4 chairs filled, spoons clinking, eyes shining. Not just a meal, but a feast of belonging. But I'm a better gardener than Olivia. Owen boasted. Not true, she shot back, fists on her hips. I pulled more weeds than he did. Yates chuckled, voice calm as dusk. Then you both win. A garden needs both weed pullers and seed planters. Calla laughed with them, meeting Yates's eyes across the rising steam. Her smile held no shadow of weariness, only peace. I never thought I'd have a supper like this again, nor I. Yates answered low, but now we can. Every day afterward, Olivia hummed a hymn Reverend Haynes had taught her. Owen tapped stones against the table in rhythm. Yates listened, arm draped around Calla's shoulders, his chest rising with quiet fullness. Before bed, he carved another line, Summer Supper. Calla pressed her hand over his as the knife drew, marking the moment, anchoring it forever. One morning, they all cut alfalfa together. Yates swung the scythe, its blade flashing in sun. Calla followed, gathering sheaves. Olivia ran along, scooping the stray stalks, singing to herself. Owen tied each bundle tight, his small hands toughening to twine. Sweat darkened their clothes, but no one complained. When they paused, Yates raised the water jug to Calla's lips. Then to each child, sky lay endless above, meadow gold stretching outward. Calla sat on a bundle, watching them, her heart swelling. Once I thought life was just endurance. Now, I know it's work we share, even when we're tired. Yates smiled, wiping his brow. I've learned it again, too. Hard labor is light when it's done beside you. Bah. Look, Owen thrust out his hands, sticky with alfalfa sap. My hands look like yours. Yates laughed, taking them in his own. They do. Every stain proves you belong here. Olivia darted over with a purple bloom. Mama, I found tonight's flower. Calla drew her in, laughing through her tears. By dusk, stacks of hay rose tall, ash circling them in glee. Their shadows stretched long as they walked home. 4 shapes against the earth, a portrait of family. That night, Yates carved again, day of labor, and summer rolled on. The garden swelled with green, corn tasseled, carrots pushed orange crowns through soil, potatoes cracked the ground. Olivia carried baskets of vegetables, singing loud. Owen followed, arms full of potatoes, ash leaping at stray husks. Inside, Calla toasted grain over the fire, scent filling the cabin. Yates sat on the porch, sharpening his knife, gaze sweeping the garden. The children, the woman bent over her work, his chest filled until it ached. Remember, Calla said, as she stepped out with a basket of grain, when this place was dust and shadow. Look now. He nodded, eyes glowing. Now it is alive. He cut deep into the porch rail, carving the words, "The house alive." Owen climbed into his mother's lap. Olivia curled into Yates's arms. The dog sprawled beneath their feet. Calla leaned into her husband's shoulder, whispering, "I don't need riches. I don't need more. Just this place. Just you and them." Yates pressed his lips to her hair. "And me. My whole life. I'll need nothing else." The valley blazed with sunset, kitchen smoke, rising thin to the heavens. The cabin stood small but sure, no longer lonely. It breathed. It lived, with laughter, with sweat, with tears, with love, and anyone listening could not help but weep, for they knew a house is never built by wood and nails alone. It is built by the choice to stay, by small hands, and by hearts that refuse to let go. The cabin by Jefferson Fork had changed from ruin into a home, from shelter into a house alive. The justice of the heart was no longer words. It stood there in every sprout, every laugh, every breath of that place. Part 10. The Eternal Whisper. Night fell over Jefferson Fork like an old wool blanket washed many times. Soft, clean, free of fear, the cabin breathed steady. Coals glowed low in the hearth. The iron chain holding the kettle clinked faintly each time the wind brushed the chimney. The timbered ceiling caught the firelight and gave it back in circles of warmth. Olivia slept on her side, clutching the horn button in her small fist. Owen lay turned toward the window, the wooden knife by his pillow, worn smooth from his nightly grip. Ash curled beneath the bed, twitching an ear now and then at the pop of sap in the fire. Calla sat at the edge of the bed, sewing the last stitch into a heavy wool shirt, needle in, needle out, resting in rhythm, the same rhythm they had learned together. Work, stay, endure. On the porch, Yates leaned against a post, drinking in the scent of wet pine and the river murmuring beyond the house. Across the porch, rails stretched the carved record of their life. First day, the fence, first supper, handprints, the cord, the wedding, first, planting, first, laughter, summer supper, shared, labor, the house alive. At the bottom, space still waited. Yates set his thumb on the wood, the grain worn smooth where fingers had touched so often. He turned, looking through the open door. Calla lifted her eyes, and their gaze caught. He whispered her name, not as a command, not even as a question, just as prayer. Kaya. The name slid through the room, brushed the beams, the children's brows, and settled over the coals like a benediction. She smiled small, the kind of smile only the ones who stay ever see. She folded the shirt, blew out the small lamp, leaving the fire as the house's heartbeat. Yates came in and hung his hat on the old nail beside her square of cloth, beside the dried wreath, beside the thin copper ring, simple tokens, yet they spoke like a family Bible. He touched the ribbon tied at his wrist, the knot still held. Then he sat beside Calla, his broad hand covering hers. No grand speeches, only the words that keep a night alive. I'm here. Her eyes answered without sound. I see you. Outside, the river went on. The wind no longer howled, for every crack had been sealed with mud, with nails, with rope, and with stubborn silence. Inside, a man had learned to pray by speaking his wife's name low, steady, as though sowing seed into earth. Winter arrived in white breath. One night, frost laced the windows. Ice clung to the roof beams. Olivia coughed hard, fever burning her brow. Owen fumbled for rags, hands trembling with fear. Calla held her daughter, laying a cool cloth and herbs Reverend Haynes had given at autumn's end. The fire in the hearth faltered, coals collapsing. Yates struck sparks, paper, straw, dry pine. He cupped his hands and breathed deep. A blue flame caught, turned red, then flared bright in his tired eyes. He stacked twigs, then logs, built a frame as though setting posts. The fire stood tall again. He soaked another cloth, passed it to Calla. She laid it on Olivia's head. No words needed. Yates, Calla whispered, voice frayed with fear. He looked up. Don't let the fire die. He nodded, sealing it like a vow. It won't. The night dragged long as a snow road. Wind shoved the walls, claws tapping like beasts at the door. Each cough from Olivia drove Calla's back straighter. Her eyes, needles, piercing the dark. Owen tried to doze but jerked awake, clutching the quilt's edge. Ash whimpered low whenever the girl thrashed. Near dawn, the fever broke. Olivia's breath evened. Her face cooled from crimson to rose. Calla pressed her forehead to her daughter's hand, tears spilling in silence. Yates sank to the floor, back to the wall. One hand held the hearth steady. The other rubbed the ribbon at his wrist. Head bowed, he whispered again, so low only wood and fire heard. Kaya. In that name was fear, thanks, and promise. Not a bargain with heaven, just a man telling the world he stood his watch here, with the fire in this home. When the sky outside turned gray, Yates stepped onto the porch. Mist clung thick, his fingers damp with frost. He cut a new line into the rail. The night of the fire kept. His hand warmed at the groove as though it burned from within. Calla came out, wrapped in shawl, resting her forehead against his shoulder. He shut his eyes and answered her silence with the word that had become their covenant. Kaya, her name, had become the house's breath. Whenever he felt himself drift, he called it. And he was anchored. Spring, rinse the valley clean. Willow buds shimmered pale green along the river. On the slope, Calla planted seeds. Pressing slats marked corn, cabbage, squash. Olivia spelled the words aloud, each letter a prayer cast into soil. Owen dragged a cart of dark sand from the riverbank, shoulders straining, pride bright. Yates planed boards for a new window frame, each stroke singing soft, not the clamor of war, but the humble song of a craftsman's peace. When he rested, he watched Calla show Olivia to spell, show Owen to tie knots. He thought, this is the right way to grow old seen in the eyes of those you love, and in the work that lasts. At noon, they ate outside cornbread, bean milk, strips of smoked meat. The flour sackcloth on the table fluttered with the wind, leaving grain like stars on the surface. Ash waited beneath, alert for crumbs. Laughter was no longer a guest here. It was furniture. Tomorrow, Yates said, I'll frame a small school beside the chicken pen. 3 families, up valley, want to send their children. Calla's eyes brightened, a smile lifting from lips to eyes. We've got a slate, only missing a bell. I'll make one from a tin can. Hang it in the tree. I'll ring it. Olivia cheered. I'll wipe the slate each evening. Owen added solemnly. That afternoon, they set posts, leveled stones, brushed earth clean. A patch of ground in front of the porch became their classroom. Futures could be written, erased, written again. Yates carved another mark. The day of the school. He knew this line would echo beyond their house, connecting them to other homes. Calla pressed her hand to the ribbon at his wrist. He bowed, whispering the word that always closed the circle. Kaya. Late summer, cottonwood leaves fell like postcards of gold. By the river where they wed, they walked again. He stepped into the water, cool around his ankles, and held his hand back for her. She lifted her skirts and followed. No new rings, no vows, only old hands clasped and breathing as one. Tired? He asked softly. Yes, she admitted, but tired, the way someone feels when they finally have a home. He nodded, smiling. So am I. From the cabin came Olivia's bell, Owen's shout of school's in. Both laughed, and Yates and Calla laughed too. Their wedding day echoing once more without losing strength. He leaned his brow to hers. Calla, and she answered, as always, I'm here. That was enough to carry a house across seasons. Back on the porch, Yates picked up a white stone, etched a thin mark into it, and set it beside the stone from their wedding. 2 lines stood side by side, a dash connecting the days they chose each other. Autumn came. Stars strung across the sky like seed waiting to drop. Inside the cabin, The horn button, the white stones, the cracked Bible, the paper where Olivia had written home in crooked letters, all shared the same shelf. That night, Yates ran his hand across the rail, stopping at the last blank space. He thought of it all, the creak of old doors, the howl of first storms, the fever's shadow, the sweat of shared work, the laughter of summer. Calla came to his side, shawl pulled tight. "Carve it," she said. He nodded, slowly. The knife bit. Breath paced each stroke. When it was done, a single word remained: home. Calla set her hand over the fresh cut. She turned to him, her voice low with gratitude. "Thank you for staying." He did not answer with excuses or debts. He only bowed his forehead to hers and whispered again, soft as a closing prayer, "Kaya." This time, the name moved through everything: the hat, the scarf, the wreath, the copper ring, the ribbon knot, the wooden rail. It drifted into the grass, through the fence, into the river's murmur. If someone stood at the valley's rim that night, they might have heard a voice thin as mist, yet strong as oak. A prayer only two souls knew. Inside, Olivia murmured, "Mama," in her dreams. Owen dreamed of the wooden horse turned fire. Ash lifted one eye, then slept again. Above, stars burned steady as seeds waiting for spring. Yates and Calla slipped back inside, left the coals to breathe for the night. In the hush, one could almost hear the ribbon brushing his sleeve. Faint as a nod, before sleep closed his eyes, Yates whispered one last time, scarcely a breath, "Kaja," and she smiled in the dark, answering without sound. That answer alone let him rest easy, like a man who had finally come home after an endless road. A house is not built with loud vows, but with a name whispered steady through the years. And in the hard West, sometimes a single whispered name is stronger than 100 guns. Tell us, what did this story stir in you? Share your thoughts in the comments and rate it from 0 to 10. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the next ride. If this story touched you, the next one will go even deeper. If you've ever chosen silence over revenge, leave a comment. I understand Yates